Good morning, everybody. Matt Johnson here. We'll give everyone just maybe a minute or so, not much longer, and then we'll dive into it. We've got a full plate of items to run and share with you today. So I want to kind of keep on track. And again, this video is being recorded. So if you've got anybody at your office, that couldn't make it today, or tied up working on other projects, that's totally fine. We'll get you that recording later this week as well. Kind of watching our numbers here, and there's still some people joining, so I'll give them just a little bit, and then we can get started. Okay, so let's get started. So again, thanks for joining. Matt Johnson here with VRC VitalECM, and kind of starting all of these software education series, if you will, the same way, just kind of introductory of who we are, because as we progress through the different types of meetings that we're going to do, we're going to have different folks joining. So some of this may be review, but we've got our sales team, which is led by Jim Mountain. If you ever need to get a hold of him, that's his email address there. And then as far as our implementation and support team, everyone listed there: Naas, Ben, Kyle, myself, Scott, and Stacy. And then, of course, our support email, fbsupport@vitalecm.com. And so today, really what we're going to work on is the PSI capture software. And really, kind of want to thank everyone for joining. We have some folks that are on the call today that have never seen PSI capture before, and definitely a large chunk of the folks on the call have seen PSI capture before. So some of what we'll do today is walk through just some standard invoices, and some basic things there. And then we're actually going to dive a little bit deeper, although not terribly deep, but into each one of these different types of invoices that you see here today. It is going to be a two-day session, if you will. So we're going to work today. We'll get as far as we can, and then we'll jump in tomorrow and wrap everything up. So tomorrow, ideally, everything we kind of focus on tomorrow would be more geared towards the vendor statements process that we've talked about in the past, and then also creating templates, modifying templates, managing templates, everything that kind of goes along with that. So, if you had some folks that maybe weren't going to dive into the templating and they're busy, and didn't want to join tomorrow, that's certainly fine. But certainly would encourage everybody, because just sometimes seeing how that works is good and helpful. So keep moving here. So just again, an introductory, to our company. So VRC stands for Vital Records Control, and that's our parent, if you will. And VitalECM is the division that we work out of. We are a premier FileBond reseller. We provide the installation, the training, and support to go along with that. As a company as a whole, we also provide document conversion services, so scanning, if you will, paper to digital. Even long-term document storage, so box storage and shredding services, those types of things. So if you ever are interested or need any of that, feel free to reach out. We can let you know. 300 FileBond installs, customers, if you will, throughout the United States, and definitely a good chunk in Canada. And really, document and content management has been our focus over the years, really since the beginning. So we're definitely experts in that industry. As far as the FileBond software, FileBond's a division of Upland Software, which is based out of Austin, Texas. That's really our core repository for a lot of the documents that we'll show you today. Their support and development is based out of Lincoln, Nebraska. The software that I'll show today, PSI Capture, is actually owned by a company called Tungsten Automation. Tungsten Automation is a recent name change. In the prior company name, if you will, or brand, was Kofax. And Kofax has been an industry leader for decades, and to the degree of probably 30 years of providing high-level capture solutions to customers like yourselves. So just a few kind of basic things about FileBound for those that are maybe new to the group. It's a browser-based solution built on .NET technology. We have a full REST API suite, which means we can integrate with any system out there on the market, as long as that system allows us to do that type of integration. FileBound has a nice customizable workflow interface and forms, which means we don't have to have a development team on staff, or we don't have to supply you with a development team, if you will, to build your workflows and forms. Those are things that we can handle in just a simple professional services engagement, which is nice. And as we kind of look at our footprint of customers throughout the United States, you can see, all the green dots kind of represent, a company that is using FileBound through VitalECM through our division. And so today, when we're talking about the PSI, we're going to focus really mostly on the AP invoice processing. And what I kind of like to point out is for customers that are maybe newer to this process or newer to us as a company, or even kind of as a reminder to folks that have been with us for 10, 15 years, is really when we start digitizing our invoices, we start looking at a life cycle change for that invoice. So what I mean by that is, when we had paper, we would do our data entry at the very end of the process. So when we're entering it into the accounting system, now we're digitizing that and we're doing all that work up front. And when we do that work up front, instead of keying in invoice number, date, etc., what we like to do is use the OCR software, in this case, PSI Capture, to grab as much data as we can. So that way we're actually saving data entry time. And then once we port that invoice and data into FileBound, pass that through to your accounting system. So that way there is no keying at the end of the invoice lifecycle, and we're simply extracting data and double checking it. So ultimately, if you think of it, what we really want you to become is somebody that's kind of filling in the blanks what the OCR doesn't extract, but really verifying the data. So that way, all that's double checked. And so then what we'll talk about once we get into kind of templating is, knowing your numbers. And what I mean by that is, what makes sense to template? How do we get to 80% of our invoices templated? And even a lot of you are beyond that to the 90 to 95%. So we'll kind of work through all of that. So let's take a look. So I've got the PSI Capture software open, and this first kind of run through is going to be just a quick run through of the software, so that people that are on the call today that haven't seen PSI Capture and haven't seen it in action with AP invoices kind of get that visual, if you will. And then I'll back up, and then I'll kind of walk through and break it down, pretty deep from there. So this is PSI Capture. The way that PSI Capture works is it works in what are called profiles. Each profile has a number of different combinations of modules that we can apply. So on the left-hand side, you can see we kind of have different steps that we can apply to a profile. The nice thing is, for all of our customers, we simplify it, and we always start off with the Capture Import module. And so you would simply just click your module, Capture Import, and then you would see your profile assigned to you, and you can select that profile. So in this case, it's a simple profile called AP Invoices Standard. And from there, what I'm going to do is kind of browse out to my folder where I've got some invoices stored, highlight the ones that I want to import, hit this green button at the top to bring those into Capture, and then you'll see my batch, you kind of get created there. And because PSI Capture works in modules, then once we're done with the capture step, if you will, then we just simply click this Close Batch button in the top left-hand corner. And when we do, it prompts us to continue the batch forward in the process. And we say, okay, yes, we want to do that. So then that closes that module, or the capture module. Then it brings the batch to this classification module. And what it did there kind of went fast, but it ran the OCR against the first page of each of those invoices, and then look to see, does the data that it grabbed from that first page match a template that we have built into the system? And then if the answer is yes, it flags it as classified. And if the answer is no, you can see it kind of gives us this little orange triangle. So then once it's done with classification, it moves it to this index step. And when we're at the index step, then what you can see is it'll then take that template and then look at the spots on the invoice to grab the data off of it. So for example, it recognized this, MyDM invoice, and it populated the vendor name and vendor number. And then it extracted the invoice number based off of the zone that we defined. And with PSI capture, we'll dive into a little bit deeper in a little bit, but it uses smart zones. So it's looking for keywords in a specific zone and then creating the field based off of that. So in this case, in our zone, we use the word page as our anchor word, and then we're extracting the invoice number here. And that could be because maybe invoice wasn't unique enough in the area that we're grabbing the invoice, such as if you notice down here, we see the word invoice also. So instead of using that word, we use the word page. That's more unique in this area, and then it grabbed the value that we're after. So that's kind of one of the things that we've got, or that we can accomplish with PSI capture. And then as I kind of tab through, you can see it kind of jumps and zooms into what it finds. And then in the event of like this discount amount field, when I tab into there, it didn't find a value, so it unzooms in case you want to kind of scan the invoice, if you will, with your eyes and see if there's anything in there. If there's not, you can certainly tab through. Same with freight. I don't see any freight as well. It was set to 0. And then, of course, grab our invoice total down at the bottom. And then for today, a lot of you will enter in the department location, but for today, I just defaulted it to 305 just so we can kind of keep going as far as that goes. And then as I hit tab, it'll take me then to my next document. So if you think of my earlier statement, what we want you to do is run the invoices through with the software, let it extract the data that it can, and then you become kind of a verification, okay, that looks good, that looks good. Oh, goofed up the due date, so I can type in the number if I want to, for example, and then move on to the next field. That looks good. Freight 0, great, got the total, move on. So now the number of seconds that we spend per invoice drops significantly, and that's the benefit of the OCR. The benefit of the templating is to extract the correct data from the correct spots and then populate that. So let's talk about this example. So I purposely have an invoice that did not have a template. So just like you'll have plenty of times in the invoices that you process, the first field that you see, classification ID, that's a place where we put the name of the template. Typically, the name of the template is going to be the vendor number. So if you're one of those people on the AP team that has all of your vendor numbers memorized, which I know there's a lot of you on the call, then you can actually type it in there. And then as you hit tab, PSI capture will do a lookup. It'll grab the name and the number and then fill in those fields so that you can simply just tab through those fields. And then you get into the invoice number field here. So now we kind of have two choices. We could do our data entry. We could certainly type in the invoice number if we wanted to, or we could take advantage of that OCR data that happened during that classification process and use that to fill in these fields. And we do that by taking our mouse and we just hover over the value. And you can kind of see there's like a tooltip, what they call, that pops open and it tells you, the data that you're going to grab. So with my mouse, I'm just going to click one time with my left mouse button, and then that'll fill in the field on the left. Same with invoice date, fill in the field on the left. If there's a due date, great. If I'm going to leave it blank, no big deal. If I go PO number, I don't see there's a discount, but I see, steel, of course, has the new RMF freight or percentage, their marketing fund, and then invoice total here. So we kind of fill those fields out, and then as we kind of tab through, we get on to our next invoice. So let's say you get to this invoice and you realize, well, I don't know the vendor number of this invoice, no big deal. So instead of typing into the classification ID field, I'm simply just going to tab, and then that opens up my lookup, and I can start typing, if you will, my vendor, and it starts filtering that list as I type. And once it highlights the one I like, I can either click the OK button or I can just hit enter on my screen, and then that returns the vendor name and vendor number. So what's important to kind of just mention visually, if you will, the classification ID field is blank up above, and that's okay because we actually don't map that field to FileBound. We're just using that as a tool to fill in the vendor name and number. So you don't have to go up and fill in that field. It's okay to just leave that blank. And then same story here. I could certainly type it, or I could just start clicking. There's a date there, and so in this case, they just have a payment terms of 30 days. So I'm going to leave that blank. And for those that were on our FileBound meetings, you'll know that FileBound will have a rule built in that if we don't have a vendor term defined for that vendor, we can then automatically populate that based off of 30 days as a default. So it's okay to leave that invoice due date blank here. Could be a PO number. Oh, there it is. And I don't see a discount. I do see that there's freight. So I'll grab that and grab our invoice total. So we're good there. And then again, now we're kind of back into invoices that are templated. So now my time, instead of maybe being 30 seconds, for example, I can kind of tab through this, make sure it's grabbed all the data. Looks good to me. And tab through again, looks like it grabbed the data correctly. Awesome. And so then once I'm done with my batch, and as I hit the tab, what PSI Capture does on its own is it clicks that close batch button for you, basically. And so that's why I see a pop-up here. So I'm gonna say, okay, yeah, let's move this batch forward to the next step, which is our quality assurance step. And so this is a lot different than some of the other softwares that you might be working with that for users that are not using PSI Capture today. But what this does, it gives you a visual of your data before you commit that or upload it into FileBound. And what's nice is you can sort by any one of these columns, if you will, to kind of get and look at patterns. Like you might say, oh, our PO numbers should only be this. This is outside of our normal numbering scheme. Maybe I need to fix that. Or, hey, this invoice total is for $3,000. Maybe I better double check that, those types of things. And then from here, of course, you can then click on close batch, and that would then take these invoices and migrate them into FileBound. So really, that's the gist of it. So really, just it's going to suspend that here and kind of take us back to the beginning. So now that the folks are, everyone's kind of caught up and understands that, what we'll do is we'll really run through that again, except we'll kind of break down each step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab those same invoices, this time as PDFs. And if you think about how the PDFs got here, really, so typically our customers are seeing the invoices come through, from the vendor directly via email, if you will, and then they've got a process that are going to download those into a folder, and then from PSI Capture we take those invoices and bring them into our batch. And the nice part about that process is you control when you create your batches in PSI Capture, how many invoices live in that batch, how much time do you have to process, etc. So you kind of have all of that control. We do have the ability for PSI Capture to monitor your email inbox, if you will, or subfolder of your inbox, where it would sweep the invoices from PSI Capture. The only downside to that, and this is just feedback that we've gotten from existing customers, is that you do lose a little bit of that control, because now PSI Capture is reaching into your email every so often to grab those invoices. And now instead of choosing when you create a batch, you're going to maybe log in and have 4 or 5 different batches, created for you throughout the day. So some people kind of like that control. Other people don't mind. So again, an option, but I definitely like to mention that we can import from email direct. It's just something to think through and talk through, and we can definitely help you through that process. Okay. The other thing to mention as far as the invoices, just getting them into this folder. So some people will work with their IT departments and come up with a solution with Power Automate to be able to automatically save those out to a folder for them from their email, which is real handy. So you're not doing a save as, or you're not dragging and dropping it out. And then I've got a handful of customers that, back in the day, because they've been with us for so long, it was easier to choose like a third-party software, such as like a Mappy Labs, where it's like a plug into your Outlook and does that type of auto save for you as well. So, if you're doing it manually and you think IT can help you out to automate that, let us know. We can kind of point them in the right direction. It's just usually just a simple email of for them what to look for. So, all right. So I'm going to hit the Start Capture, and that's going to take these invoices and bring them into my batch here. And you'll notice what happens this time around is that those invoices actually disappear out of that folder. So when that happens, what we're actually doing is archiving them to a separate folder. That way, if there's one or multiple people importing from this folder, people aren't actually stepping on each other or, grabbing invoices that they shouldn't, that sort of thing. And then once our invoices are loaded in our batch, some of our users will have invoices that come across as multiple pages, and it may be a situation where a vendor sends you a PDF with multiple pages. And so depending upon the situation, we may have special profiles to handle those. But let's say just in our general AP invoices process, we don't. And so you kind of have the ability to use your keyboard on your mouse. So I'm using actually the up and down arrow on my keyboard. I can use the left arrow to open and close these different sections here. And then when I'm looking at page 2, let's pretend for fun that that is a new page for a new invoice. And so then I'm going to use the letter Q on my keyboard, and then that's going to break apart those two documents. And when it breaks apart, then you'll notice now I've got 2 different invoices and 2 different document folders, which is kind of what we want. Or let's say I goof, I can undo that, for lack of a better way of saying it, by highlighting the document folder and click the letter W, and then that merges those back together. One of the nice things with PSI Capture is if you forget about the Q and the W, you can always right click and do a split, and then also right click and do a join. Okay, so now that we're kind of done with this batch, again, done with the capture step, I'm gonna hit close batch and then move that batch forward. And again, runs that classification, does the OCR, extracts the data, finds the templates, fills in the blanks, if you will. And what I want to talk about inside this indexing module is a few different things. So one of the things you saw is that on my due date on this Fastenal invoice, I purposely made the zone, a different size. So a good question that we get from people is, hey, how do I modify my template so that the next time an invoice comes in, grabs the data correctly? And the answer is you can actually do that on the fly. And so when I'm looking at this invoice here, and I see my pink zone is off, I can click on the edit pencil next to my form ID on the drop down menu up here. And when I click on that guy, it opens up my classification window. And then I can go to my zones on the left. And if I go to my invoice due date here, I'm just going to hit this pencil icon to modify that zone. And the older you get, the more you like the zoom. So I'm the same way. So as I zoom in, if you will, I can see my pink zone, and now I can slide it over and say, okay, I just need that to be there from here on out, and then hit save. And then simply save my way out. And now I'm back to my batch. It'll ask you, do I want to run this batch through those decisions again? I can say yes. And then that'll run those through. And now when I look at my invoice due date field, you'll see that it's resized to the way that I want. And so just want to kind of show everybody that on the fly, it's real easy to kind of adjust that there. As far as, when we get to invoices that are not populated, and how we fill in the data, kind of what I showed earlier is about as quick as it gets. You simply just point and click the values and then fill in the fields there. I have seen some folks every once in a while, everyone's got laptops, it seems, right? And we're going into our conference rooms, or we take our laptop home, or we've got different monitor sets. And sometimes our screen resolution gets off a little bit, and that can cause some confusion with PSI Capture as well. So I've seen it where, like this index panel. So if you kind of see, I've got panels, navigator, index, and then I've got our image. But I've seen it where this index panel kind of is floating, if you will. And so people are kind of rearranging things and all that. So a common question I get is, hey, how do I rearrange my panels back to what they were originally? And so what you can do is you can kind of grab this guy, and then you'll see there's kind of a 4 square. So you can see we can kind of actually rearrange this however we like, depending upon which square we select, if you will. And if I select this one, so again, I'm hovering my mouse over it, and then I'll let go. And then that snaps that panel back into place. So if you ever see that, or maybe it's something where, this kind of consumes all of your space and the image is really small, you can certainly use these divider bars to kind of make those adjustments, and even make the adjustments over here from a left and a right standpoint. Okay. So then the other thing I like to show, we're kind of talking about screen layout, if you will. The default for PSI Capture, if I look at my index here in this little settings icon, is the first check mark here. And what that does is it puts your index fields down below, which is fine, and that's nothing totally wrong, with that. But every once in a while, you might start having to scroll up and down to get to all of your fields, which might become kind of an annoyance. So what you can do is hit this drop down and then click on display index fields to the right of the batch. And then that's where you see kind of have the 2 panels, and now you don't have to scroll up and down. It just gives you a little bit more real estate when it comes to that. Other items to kind of note inside of here, again, while we're talking about real estate, is, sometimes you're on your laptop and, again, that's not always as large as your desktop monitor, for example, or whatnot. One of the things that you can do is unpin these little panels. So you notice this navigator takes up some space. So if I said, hey, I want to hide that, I could click on this little pin, and then that hides itself onto this panel over here. And if I ever wanted to go access it, I could hover my mouse. I'm not clicking on anything, and it opens that back up. If I wanted to repin it, I could certainly click on that little pin icon, and then that would pin it back to the way it was, kind of like that. But let's just say for now, I want to unpin that, and it shrinks it there. Again, all kind of personal preference. And the same can be true for that ribbon. So, kind of as we've gotten used to Microsoft, Word, for example, over the years, right? This upper ribbon, they call it. You can minimize that too. So in the top, in the upper right-hand corner, there's this little caret icon. If you click on that guy, then it'll shrink that as well. So again, if you've got a nice big monitor, maybe not an issue at all. If you don't have a big monitor, maybe sometimes minimizing those things to give you a little bit more real estate is helpful. And I know personally, whenever I'm using my laptop direct, this is the view I prefer, just to make things that much bigger and that much more visible for me to access. So just some, again, kind of tips and tricks there. So I'm gonna, if I want to access this again, I'm just gonna hit home, and I'm going to pin this again so it's visible. And we'll go to my navigator and pin that again. But kind of want to give you that layout grid, if you will. Okay. All right, so then let's do this. Let's hit close batch here, and I'm going to move to the quality assurance step. So similar items to mention, again, with a layout standpoint, maybe you don't see the image, so same idea. You can grab any of these panels, find that four-way, if you will, and then that'll snap it right back into place. So that's easy. If we sorted by one of these and we forgot to enter in some information, you can click in here. The only way to key or fill in these fields is by doing manual data entry. So 150. I can just type that in there, if you will, and then tab your way out of it. As you fill it in and hit tab, then it automatically saves. So there's not a magical save button. I've meant to mention that also on our previous step on the indexing. There's no save button that you have to click in order to do it. As you enter it in, it saves it as you go. Then the other kind of thing that I get asked questions on, or we get asked questions on, is the zooming. What's the easiest way to zoom in PSI Capture? And this really applies to both the quality assurance and the indexing step. So you kind of see your plus and minus here. Some people like that. I'm not a huge fan of that. But what I kind of like to do is fit to width or fit to page, so you can kind of see it that way. But certainly as you're creating templates or doing other things, sometimes zooming in is handy. A lot of people might not know, and let me unzoom here real quick, is that there's a little icon right here, selection zoom, where you can kind of zoom in by drawing a box around what you want to zoom into. Same idea with this magnifier. So if I do fit to page again, sorry, and then we'll click on this magnifier, I can actually click and hold over my field if I was curious on what that value is. Oh, 144.60, and then type it in, that sort of thing. So several different options when it comes to zooming within PSI Capture, which is certainly helpful. Okay. So I think we're in good shape there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click on my home here, suspend this guy. And then now what we'll start doing is I'm going to dive into specific vendor profiles. And so the first profile I'm going to dive into is CNH. And with Case New Holland, one of the things with their invoices is they've got a lot of additional fields that we extract data off of versus just your typical freight and invoice total. And I like to show them as an example. Maybe you're not a CNH dealer, but at the same time, just the concepts of how we're extracting data, I think is incredibly important. So it's real common for our CNH dealerships to actually, well, it depends a little bit, but to set up an automated import. And the idea is that you might have to go to the CNH website, download those invoices to a folder, but then in PSI Capture, we set up a process to actually manually or automatically sweep that folder every, so many minutes. That way the user themselves isn't coming into Capture and importing them into a batch. PSI Capture is breaking that batch and creating it for them. And once we get that profile and that template created and fine-tuned well enough, then we actually get into a point where we're just simply watching the folder, we're grabbing the data, and then we're moving it into FileBound from there. And that's definitely what we have set up for several of our CNH customers, which is nice. So I'll push that batch forward into our indexing step, and then I'll talk a little bit about all of the different types of data fields we're grabbing and the reasons, why we're grabbing them basically. Okay, so it grabbed all that data, and then it matched the template, grabbed the data. So really it then knows that we're good, and it moves us towards then the quality assurance step. So a lot of our customers, when we're monitoring a folder, they'll initially set it up so that the batch lands at this step, and then maybe after a month of just proof that it's working the way that exactly you want, then we take away this step so that it simply just flows directly into FileBound. And from a capture standpoint, they're not touching the CNH invoices at all. So in here, just kind of give you a visual, if I was looking at my 7 different invoices and I just wanted to only focus on my invoice number, I could use my down arrow to look at the different invoice numbers for each of those. A little bit different than before where we were looking at one invoice. So we can kind of sort and say, okay, our dates look okay, our PO numbers look okay, except for maybe this guy, but it looks like that's a customer reference number, so probably is a credit, so we're going to be okay there. And then we can start looking at our different invoice totals, so on and so forth. And for those that haven't or aren't as familiar, if you will, with the CNH invoice, what they do is on multiple pages, they'll put kind of this block of numbers at the end of that invoice, and that's going to have your discounts or your shipping costs or your whatever. So in this case, this invoice has an invoice total, grabbing that parts value, and we're going to grab the discount, and then we're going to have another field that's going to grab that drop ship. And then once we upload that data into FileBound, then we're going to auto code that in a way for the user so that they don't actually have to code, because we're extracting all that different data off of those invoices. So again, if I kind of look at this one, they've got all these different fees, so we grab that. We've got here's a 3-page invoice. We're kind of grabbing the restocking fees, transportation charges, and all of that, and again, we'll code that inside of FileBound for them. So really, with the PSI Capture, we're extracting a lot of extra data, if you will, with that template, so that we can save data entry time later. So just to give you kind of a visual of that, let me open up a quick slide I've got. So this would be one of those invoices, but inside of FileBound. So the first time you open it in FileBound, you would see that, okay, it's got all of the data that we extracted on the left-hand side, and then we utilize that data to auto-create the geocoding for that invoice down below. As a user, of course, inside of FileBound, you can always make changes and adjustments to that. But one of the things you'll notice on this invoice is we've added the handling and the freight and handling together, and we created all of that onto one GL account. So that way, it just saves you all that data entry, saves you from doing the math. And the great part of it is then FileBound's taking the variance to confirm that our invoice total, or parts value total, if you will, matches the dollar amount that we're doing on geocoding. So we can work with you on those rules, again, inside of FileBound. But the reason we grab all that data is so that we can get to this point inside of FileBound. Now, for those that have receiving documents or purchase orders in FileBound, then of course, now we've got an index that's data entry is fully done, and we can start comparing the documents. And if it finds a matching PO, a matching receiver, and all that data matches, now you're starting to look at scenarios where I had an invoice imported from PSI Capture without a user touching it, and it filled in all this data. It entered FileBound. FileBound analyzed the data, created the geocoding. FileBound found the matching receipt of goods, if you will, for that invoice, and all that matches, then you're at a point where you can start saying, okay, what do we need to do in FileBound besides automatically push this into our accounting system? So, now you've taken an invoice, no data entry, and you've entered it into the accounting system. So kind of fun stuff when it comes to that. So get out of here. Okay, so then kind of to give you a visual of what that would look like, and also to talk a little bit about the Canadian invoices that we get. What I want to do, instead of bringing in a batch of invoices, I want to navigate down to our batch manager. And whenever you create a batch inside of PSI Capture, then that batch gets created and stored in this batch manager. And what's nice about that is, if something comes up and you got to run home or have to leave for the day or whatever the scenario is, you can always come back tomorrow or at another time and reopen that batch, and you can access that all through the batch manager. And so in this case, what I did was I created a batch of CNH invoices, but from a Canadian customer of ours. And so now when I open up this batch, I can right click and I can choose what step of the process I want to open it in. And right now it's telling me it's on the quality assurance step. So I could certainly click on that, and then that will let me open it in there. But if I needed to, I could certainly click the index step, or even if I needed to, I could back it all the way up to the capture import step. So it really depends upon what your needs are. But again, the batch manager is where you can access any batches that are in process and reopen those, if you will. So I'm going to just right click, choose open batch in, and I'm going to click on quality assurance. So that opens up this batch, and same story, grabbing all the data, and then let's talk a little bit about the tax. So in Canada, there's different types of taxes, and in this example today, I'm just grabbing the GST tax off of the CNH invoices, but regardless of the type of tax, whether it's GST, PST, HST, OST, QST, all the different types of taxes in Canada, we can grab those, right? So that's the important part, is just like grabbing all of the additional fees, we can grab all the different taxes. So that way, again, as that invoice gets into FileBound, we're auto coding it the way that it needs to be coded. The other thing that I like to mention with the CNH invoices is that it's real common for us to be able to grab this value from the ship to, which is kind of like maybe you might call it a dealer number, if you will, or whatnot. And once we get that value uploaded into FileBound, we can then translate it to the department and the location that this invoice would route to if we needed somebody to approve it. And so that's a great way to grab data off of the document that maybe isn't our department location of 305, but it's a way for us to trigger what department location that would route to because of that. So again, other types of vendors that might be like an account number or a dealer number or a ticket number or whatever they might have, that we can trigger that off of for sure. The other thing I like to mention is the fact that with CNH, we can kind of fine tune this template. So we're grabbing, like in this case, the word credit note from that zone or the word invoice. And where that becomes helpful is as we upload these invoices into FileBound, if for whichever reason, the OCR didn't grab a negative number, or we need to adjust our coding based on the fact that it's a credit note, then we can make those rules and decisions within FileBound because we know that this is a credit note and this is how our numbers should be. Maybe our tax should be negative or whatnot. So it's ultimately up to you, but being able to identify that as part of that template process is incredibly important. So we can, again, auto code those invoices. Awesome. All righty. So I'm going to click home and go back, if you will, to our next document type. And so this would be John Deere documents, if you will. And so with John Deere, there's a lot of different documents that are coming out of the Deere system that maybe aren't stored there for very long, and we need to store them inside of FileBound. And it's been real common for our dealerships to create multiple profiles to help import those items into FileBound. And so, for example, here are just some different types. So JDPO, JDSC, complete goods, generic reports, parts invoices, settlements, warranty, retail notes, those types of things. And we create those profiles, and similar to CNH, because it's real specific to the type of the document, we could actually have a folder that it monitors and do a sweep, extract the data, let you test it out for, again, a month or a week or however long it takes. And then once we're happy with it, turn it off so that we're actually doing an automated capture process with all those steps. And so I just want to kind of show you that from a John Deere standpoint. And then for today, what we'll do is we'll grab our John Deere profile here and just grab some parts invoices and import those in. So what I like about this example is it's a good show of it doesn't have to be complicated to save time, if that makes sense. And so a lot of these Deere documents, maybe we don't need to extract very much data off of them. Maybe we don't even need to walk it into a workflow inside of FileBound. Maybe it's just good to store the documents. So we always leave that up to you. You tell us how we can help and make that part better. But then as it grabs that data, again, we're grabbing, in this case, just simply a document number, a total, and a date. So real simple. If there are other fields on here, obviously we could grab them, but I like to give this as an example because it shows just, even if we're grabbing a few fields, just so you can find it, or just so we can route it, or whatever the situation might be, we can make those profiles simple as well. It doesn't have to be complicated to be automated at the end of the day. Great. Okay, so back to complicated. So let's go and click home, because that's really where we see the PSI capture is automation and complication things. And so another vendor, we've got quite a few Kubota dealerships, for example, that what you can do is if you run your Kubota invoices through PSI capture, we can kind of identify those different types of invoices, if you will. So like if it's a warranty or a floor plan or a whatever, or if it's just simply parts invoices or credits. So I kind of highlight those as a batch, and then in this case, the way that they're downloaded from Kubota is it gives me, for example, one PDF, and then I've got multiple different invoices within that PDF. So what this profile is doing, you see, we imported 10 files, but we ended up with 16 invoices, if you will, for lack of a better way of saying it, because PSI Capture kind of analyzed those invoices and said, okay, every time that invoice number changes, then let's make ourselves a new document. So that's one way to do it. Another way is you can even go more simple than that. You could say every time you see the word page 1 in the upper right-hand corner, make a new document on its own as well. So again, a way to save time, which is incredibly helpful in that regard. So let's click close batch, and then we'll walk that through the classification process. So now with these invoices, there's a lot of different templates that we've created, if you will, to read and extract that data. And then once it does and it gets into the indexing step, you'll see it's going to leverage all of those different types of templates to grab all the different types of data that we want on those Kubota documents. So that way, once we upload the invoices into FileBound, we can say, oh, this is a floor plan invoice, so I want it to go this direction, or oh, this is a whole goods invoice, so I want it to go this direction. And so what you'll see is, just as I kind of show you this classification ID field here, so again, that's the name of our template. So if I clicked on this one here, that's our extended warranty template, if you will, right? Or here's our floor plan template, so a little bit different. And then on this template, what we did is we said, okay, hey, we want the word Kubota up there. If I zoom in, then we have a spot down below where we say floor plan fee. So it finds not only the word Kubota tractor, but it also finds the floor plan fee down below. And then that tells us the correct template to use. So that way we can extract the data properly in that regard. So kind of a trickier one, but at the same time, with the right templates, we can grab the right data, if you will. And then as we kind of scroll across, you'll see Kubota is similar in nature to C&H, where they might have different fees associated to different invoices. So like this has a freight charges field, and but then if I go down to here, this has a discount charge field, but there's no freight charge field. So that's kind of where the specialization of the PSI Capture templates and the field design, which we'll kind of dive into more tomorrow, is important, because we can grab the proper anchor phrases and then grab the proper data from there. And then this is a great example of the discount comes across with a negative sign at the end of the invoice. And so we've got a rule in FileBound that would then say, okay, it's Kubota, it's got this discount, so I need to make that a negative sign. Here's how I do it. And so that's kind of the idea behind that is we again extract data in PSI, but then finalize it once it gets into FileBound. Okay. All right, so the last profile that I want to talk to you about today is our Bobcat template. And before I talk too much about it, what I want to do is open that up, and I actually want to open up that particular invoice and kind of talk about it a little bit. So with Bobcat invoices, one of the tricky things with them is a lot of times they'll create multiple PO numbers, if you will, on the same invoice. And from a geocoding standpoint, sometimes in your accounting system, what you have to do is enter in one line in the geocoding space per PO number. And that makes things complicated because now you've got this big invoice, in this case, a 4-page invoice with all sorts of different PO numbers, maybe, and at some point we've got to do some math so we know what dollar amount do we apply to each individual PO number there. And I do not envy the folks that have been doing that, if you will, manually. Inside of FileBound, or inside of PSI Capture, as they've advanced their what they call table extraction module, then we're starting to really in 2025 starting to work with some of our Bobcat dealers on testing the extraction of that data out. And so far so good. It's really been doing a bang up job of grabbing the data, and we don't have anyone quite live just yet on it. But again, we're know that from a PSI Capture standpoint, we're grabbing all the data, and from a FileBound standpoint, we're getting it into the right spots, which has really been really good. So let me do this. Let me close it there, and I'm going to grab that Bobcat invoice, those invoices, and hit Start Capture. Now, that may have scared some of you if you're not a Bobcat dealer, of multiple POs on the same invoice, or you may say, hey, I'm a CNH dealership and I know what you're talking about, or hey, I'm a commodity dealership and I know what you're talking about. So there's definitely other vendors on the market that do those types of things. Because the way that Bobcat designs and structures their invoices, this table extraction is kind of an interesting concept, and we can certainly take this concept and apply it to CNH if needed, and also apply it to Komatsu if needed as well. And I think once we extract the data, you'll kind of see what we've got here. So, all right, so I had 4 invoices, but as you can see, I've got a lot of data that we've grabbed, through here. And so if I just start with my last invoice, just for fun, you can see what we did is we've got the invoice number, the invoice date, and then our invoice total, and then we grab the PO number. So what I'm going to do is actually shrink this side of the screen so you can see more of that as we go. So grab the PO number, and then we grab the corresponding total on the other side of it. And what we do when we create our template is, with the table extraction, is we use an anchor word that's consistent enough, whether it's a specific word, like in this case, I'm using the word class, or whether it's a particular pattern. So I could say, okay, if there's a number field, or if there's a dollar amount field, or a date, I could trigger it off of that. And then that would create my zones. And so in this case, I grab kind of all that data and all that zones. So that's, again, a small, simple 1-page invoice. If I go back to our multiple page invoice, I'm going to expand this so you can see all of the data. You can see now, as I kind of go through my different ones and my different PO numbers, I've grabbed each of these different lines one by one, and we've grabbed all of that data. And if I go over to my extended price, just to kind of give you that visual, you've got all of the different dollar amounts there. So now we have all that data. So now the question is, what do we do with all that data, right? Well, when we do our migration into FileBound, we do a 2-step migration. So our first step is to migrate all of this data on its own and we park it into a supporting project in FileBound. And in this case, we're just going to call it, Bobcat invoice data. And it's just going to have the data, no images, nothing of that nature, just going to park that data. Then our normal invoice and our normal index fields like invoice number, date, PO number, et cetera, are going to go into our normal FileBound workflow. And what will happen is we'll build a special workflow that will then combine and look up the data and merge it all together so that as a user, when you log into FileBound and look at your Bobcat invoice for the first time, this is what you would see. Again, that kind of header data on the left, and then we consolidate, do the math, and create the geocoding based off of the individual PO numbers. And then for those, again, that we can take that data and look at a receiving document to see if there's a match, we can add a status field to the right that says, okay, this PO number and this amount matched a receiving document with the same PO number and the same amount. And then that way, if you had 10, 15, 20 POs on the same invoice, you'd only have to worry about focusing on the ones that might say, review or pending, meaning it hasn't come in yet, or review, meaning we found one, but the dollar amounts didn't quite line up. So we'd like you to double check it. So a lot of fun, creative ways, if you will, to grab data off of documents, within PSI Capture. In our world, as we've, been around, for 20 plus years, PSI Capture is still one of those, what we kind of joke about as a Swiss Army knife. So it's just one of those tools that you can do a lot of different things with. It's been fun to work with, and definitely as they've been acquired by this Tungsten Automation, and then also as they continue to advance their table extraction, we're going to definitely find more fun and creative ways. But my hope today is that of all the different things that you saw, there's some items to take away, whether it's just a basic, hey, we could probably change this little thing or that little thing, or maybe if we rethought about how we're saving our invoices, or if something major, say, hey, we're a Bobcat dealer and we'd like to be in line as soon as you got some other Bobcat dealers online using this. We love it. Or hey, we'd love to be first. Hook us up. We'll blow right through it. So again, kind of leave a lot of those decisions up to you, but definitely want to educate you on things that we've learned from other folks, feedback we've heard, and all that. So that's kind of what we've got for today. Then tomorrow, our plan is we're going to get into the table extraction, if you will. And the table extraction that we're going to get into is going to be specifically for statements. So if you think of like a vendor statement, and how could we take all of this data and then plug it into FileBound, and then how could FileBound take this invoice number, if you will, and amount, and confirm that we have the invoice in FileBound, that it has been posted or has been paid, whatever the status of it might be. So just to save you some time in your vendor statement reconciliation. And then once we're done with that, we're going to go into making a brand new profile. And one of the profiles I don't have in PSI Capture, or we just recently built, I should say, is Ditch Witch. And they've got some really good examples of different things that we can use the software to manage and automate. So we'll dive into those invoices tomorrow and show you how we go about building a profile, how we go about building a template, and all that. So fun stuff for tomorrow for sure. Perfect. All righty. And with that, that's all I needed for today. So appreciate everyone's time, and we will, I'll run through the questions in the chat and send you some emails on those. But again, kind of like last week when we did another capture with the basic FileBound capture software, we will send out a link to these presentations a little bit later this week, and along with some basic documentation to kind of help you through walking through those types of invoices through the software. So, and also how to create templates and fun stuff like that. But again, looking forward to tomorrow, and appreciate everyone's time today. And always appreciate your business. So have a great day.